Over the next few videos, we're going to take a look at adding sound effects to your level. This is important for a lot of reasons, and most of them are going to be fairly obvious. You're creating an environment, and an environment can often be defined by what you hear, either directly or indirectly. Maybe a sound just kind of sets a little bit of a mood, or maybe it's something obvious, like you can see great big roaring flames and you expect to hear them. I mean, you even say the word roaring flames, you kind of want to hear a roar. Now, what we're going to do is create some various ambient sound effects to scatter through our little demonstration level. We're going to take a look at sound wave data, how to construct your own sound cues, some of the various actors that you can use to position sounds in and around your level, and we're going to take a look at reverb volumes, which allow you to add reverberation like an echo, as well as how to create ambient zones to control where sounds are most audible and how they can get muffled as you pass from one room into another. Now, to give you kind of a quick demonstration as to how sounds can be really important to change the feel of a level, here is our demo level, and currently all we have are some very basic sound effects. Our mover actually has one, as was actually demonstrated in the setup of the simple level, and then really aside from that, all we have are the base sound effects which come along with gameplay. So let's go ahead and fire this up, and you hear a few things. If we run around, you can hear footsteps. If we shoot our weapon, you can hear that too, so you know that there's sound to be played. But everything else is just silent, and that can be really unnerving. Now let's compare this to the same level, but with a lot of ambient sounds added. So we'll just jump right in. Now if you listen, there's a sound of wind outside, which makes the place feel kind of lonely, and some strange noises which will play randomly every few seconds. Now as we move around, this machine over here seems to be emitting some kind of strange noise. And if we come over here to this little watery tank, you can hear bubbles. If we go to the back room, we can hear these generators. Now, I'm actually picking this up in stereo, but since we have to record these videos in mono, you won't actually be hearing that. There's some more bubbles over here, so a lot of different ambient sounds taking place, and even in here, you can still kind of make out the sound of the wind. But if you listen closely to these engines, these great big generators, as we step out of the room, they're still audible, but only just faintly. So the idea is that you wouldn't be able to hear them through the wall. And we'll show you how to set all of this up. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to begin by jumping back to our basic level. It doesn't have any sounds. And we'll just consider this to be an intro to what we're going to cover. So let's go ahead and call the video here, and in the next video we'll take a look at some of the types of assets that you'll use as you create your own sounds. In creating sound effects, there are two types of sound assets that you need to be aware of. They are sound wave data and sound cues. Let's jump into the content browser and have a look at these. I'm going to make sure we're searching for all assets. I'm going to take my object type area here in the filter, switch that to all types, and if you scroll down, you'll see sound wave data. Now, a sound wave data asset you can think of as really just like a wave file. It's just the sound itself, and you can double-click any of these and sample them.
Affirmative.
So yeah, he'll talk to you.
Secure.
There are all kinds of sound effects included with UDK. Feel free to search through them. A lot of them have to do with various actions that the characters will perform, all of your weapons, all of your music. It's all in here, even the announcer. Now, the other type of asset you have is a sound cue. Now, a sound cue is more than just a sound effect. Where a sound wave data is really just like a typical wave file, a sound cue is the sound effect combined with a series of instructions to control how playback is going to occur. Now, let me go ahead and show you how these work. We can double-click any of these and sample them as well. And at the outset, they may seem just exactly like a sound wave data. But they'll do some interesting things as you start to scroll through. Now, there's a particular one I want to grab for us real quick. If I scroll down past all of the various footsteps, there's one called A Character Robot Impact Jib Medium Cue. Now, each time I double-click this, notice that the sound is different. That's because we have several different actual sound waves that are being combined together randomly, so that every time the engine called on this sound cue to play, we'd get a different one. Now, that's only one example of how sound cues can be very, very powerful, but on top of that, sound cues are edited through a visual editing system called the Sound Cue Editor. Let me show that to you real quick. If we right-click on any sound cue, we can choose Edit using the Sound Cue Editor, and you get a little editor that's very similar to Kismet or the Material Editor, in which you can take sound wave data in the form of a visual node and combine them together with a variety of other nodes to create your final effect. So in this case, we have 3 sound effects, which we can sample individually by clicking the Play Selected Node button up here in the toolbar. And there's this one, and this one. Now, these are all being combined together through a random node, which is just going to randomly select each one. Notice in its settings that we have randomize without replacement, so it'll make sure that all 3 of them play before we repeat. Then we have a modulator. This is actually giving us even more variety because it's modulating the pitch each time the sound plays. So the pitch will drop down to 80% and all the way up to 120%. We're also modulating the volume as well. Finally, we're attenuating the sound so that we can position it in 3D space and give it some fall off. In the end, all of that is plugged into our final sound cue, allowing us to get a variety of different types of sounds. So I'm going to click the Play Sound Cue, and what this will do is add up all of these different effects that we've strung together and give us the result. So you can see where a sound wave data is really just a simple sound effect, and a sound cue is a combination of one or more sound effects along with a series of instructions to give you a lot of control over how playback is going to occur. Now that's really all I wanted to cover here, is just introduce you to those 2 assets, so that will wrap things up for this video. Thanks a lot. To get you quickly in tune with designing your own sound effects, I want to start off by talking about the Sound Cue Editor. So let's open up the content browser. And what I want you to do is to find any blank space here in the middle of the browser, right-click, and choose New Sound Cue. Now we had to give this a name, so let's put this in a package that we'll call Sound Demo. Group will be Sound Cues, and then for the name, let's just choose, well, let's call this one Random Number, and you'll see why as we go along. Now we'll click OK, and we get a couple of things. One, the Sound Cue Editor will appear in the background with a blank sound cue, and we can actually see the sound cue here in the content browser. Your next move when you do this should be to save your package. So I'm going to click on the Sound Demo package and hit Control S, click Save, and there we go. Now, back over here in the Sound Cue Editor. As I mentioned earlier, this is a visual interface that allows you to put together various nodes to control how your sound is playing back. However, right now we don't have any sounds to play. So I'm going to jump back over to the content browser, and over here underneath the object type, make sure that all types are visible, and I'm going to grab sound wave data. Now let's make sure we're searching through all assets, and I want you to search for the word countdown. Now this is the announcer and the various countdowns from 10 to 1 toward the end of a match. So you have things like
10, 6, 1.
So all sorts of different numbers all the way from 1 to 10. Now I'm going to grab all of these at the same time. Just hold down Shift and go from the first one to the last one so we have all of them. Now I'm going to put the content browser away, and I'm going to right click over here inside the Sound Cue Editor, and we can do this manually or automatically. And here's the automatic way. We can just choose random and click, and check it out. It automatically brought all 10 of our sound effects in and connected them up to a random node. But that's almost like cheating, isn't it? So let's take that out, and we'll build it manually just so you can see how it works. So I'm going to right click again, and we have sound node wave, and all you see is countdown 0, 1, but since everybody's selected, it'll bring all 10 of them in at the same time. And I'll go ahead and maximize this view just to make it a little easier to see. Now, navigating the Sound Cue Editor is very much like navigating many of these other visual editors that you'll find throughout UDK. If you drag with the left mouse button, you're panning the view. Right mouse will pan as well, and left and right together will zoom in and out. So we have all 10 of our sound effects. Let's go ahead and set them up through a random node, just like we saw a second ago. This is as easy as right-clicking and choosing the type of node that you want. Now there's not that many nodes to choose from, but you still have a lot of flexibility in how you string them together. Just as a quick overview, we have attenuation. This allows us to attenuate sound, meaning it falls off as we move away from it, as well as to spatialize it in 3D space, to actually position that sound somewhere. We have a concatenator, which allows us to string sounds together. So if we wanted to, we could use a concatenator instead of a random, and instead of getting a random number, we would actually be stringing all the numbers together. And we'll take a look at that here in just a moment. We can use a delay, which, as the name suggests, will just kind of insert a pause from one sound to the next. A distance crossfade will allow you to fade from one sound effect to another based on your distance from the actual sound's location. So as you get further away, you can shift from one sound to the next, which is kind of an interesting effect if you get down and play with it. Next, we have looping. This will make a sound just continue to play back either indefinitely or a set number of times. Now, sound node mature is kind of a specific thing. Basically, this is a way you can flag a sound effect so that the system knows it's mature, and if the player has the mature settings off so they don't want to hear things like profanity, then that type of sound effect will be flagged off. A mixer is very much like the actual mixer piece of audio equipment. It allows you to plug in multiple inputs and control how much volume is going to come out of each one of those inputs. A modulator allows you to edit an incoming sound by modulating its pitch up and down to make it higher or lower, as well as modulating its volume up and down. And you have random values that you can play with. So each time the sound is called, you can get a random value within a range, which is very nice. You also have a continuous modulator, where the modulator is only going to change the pitch or volume of a sound just the moment it's played. A continuous modulator will change the pitch and volume over time. So your pitch can start off low and go high across the realm of playback. Down from here we have an oscillator. This allows you to control the pitch and volume based on a sine wave. And so you can control the various settings of the sine wave to make your volume go up and down, make your pitch go up and down, and so forth. A random node is what we're going to be using in a second. This allows you to just randomly select one of the incoming inputs. And a sound node wave param can be accessed externally via Kismet or Matinee. Now, let's start off just by using a random. Now, by default, a random is going to come in with only 2 inputs, and we have 10 things to hook up. So instead of having to string together a bunch of randoms, what we're going to do instead is right-click and choose Add Input. And we can do this a total of 7 more times. So there's 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. And now it'd just be a matter of wiring these all together. So we'll take just a second and do that. Now, obviously what's going to happen here is whenever we make a call to this random node, it's going to grab one of these sound effects and give us a number. So let's see what this sounds like. If we get everybody connected up, and here's our last one, think. All we have to do is connect this final node to our little outgoing speaker, and now we can hit play, and we want to make sure we're clicking the play sound cue. There's only 3 buttons up here in the toolbar. There's stop, if you just want to stop the playback. There's play a selected node, so if I grab, say, countdown 5 and click the play selected node button, what we get is
5.
But if we grab play sound cue, we're actually going to grab everything.
7, 5, 8, 3, 4.
And each time we click, we're getting a random number. So you can see how that works. Now, if we swap this out for, say, a concatenator, and we can add just as many inputs here as well, so there's 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Now, the order in which we plug these up will be important, so I'm actually going to start at 10, and they're going to kind of crisscross over each other. There's 9, 8, 7, 6. I should put them out of order just because it'd be kind of funny. Like, the announcer can't count. Make her count to 5 with 1, 2, 5. All right, and then let's plug this into the speaker, and now listen to what we get.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
So we've just taken all of those sound effects and we're just playing them back to back through concatenation. So it's pretty easy to see how all this works. Now what I'm going to do real quick is delete all these nodes and go back to that nice automatic way of just choosing a random at the outset, and everybody's all connected together for us. And let's talk about a few of these other nodes that you're going to be using commonly. If we were to just plug this in and save this out as a sound cue, this sound would kind of sound like it's coming from everywhere. It wouldn't have any sort of attenuation. It wouldn't be located in any given position. You just hear it coming straight through your headphones with no stereo effect whatsoever. If we were to add an attenuation, we solve that problem, if you thought it was a problem. An attenuation node gives us the ability to choose whether or not the volume itself is going to be attenuated based on distance, which means the closer we get, the louder it gets, or the further away, the fainter. And we can also spatialize so that we can get 3D audio. So if you have like a full surround sound system, you can hear the sound actually going from one speaker to the next, and so on and so forth. Now, there are a few different algorithms you can choose. Is there linear fall off, logarithmic fall off? Really, it's just a way to control the math of how quickly you go from full audio to no audio. And you have the sound distance as well. So you can have normal distance, which puts your sound effect in a single point in space, or you could say that that sound is coming from an infinite plane in any two of the axes. Now down from here you have radius min and radius max. The way these work is radius min is the area within which you have full volume. Radius max is the area without which you have no volume. And in between radius min and radius max, you get a fall off, which is determined by your distance algorithm. I hope that made sense. Really, in a nutshell, you can visualize this just with two spheres, one inside the other. If you're inside the innermost sphere, you hear everything at full volume. As you pass through the first sphere on your way out to the surface of the second one, your volume will get fainter and fainter and fainter and fainter until it's dead silent. The exact same behavior actually comes out of point lights. Incidentally, though it's not sound, of course it's light. Now, let's take a look at just a couple of other common nodes that you're going to be using probably quite a bit, one of which is looping. And looping is just going to take any sound effect and play it over and over a set number of times. By default, it's set to loop indefinitely, which means forever. If you don't want it to play indefinitely, say you only want it to loop 5 times, you can set the loop count min and max to 5 on both sides. Or if you wanted a random range of loops, you could specify a min and a max that were different from one another. So if we plug this in and hit play.
7, 2, 3, 4, 6, 5.
And there we go. So it looped around and then it quit. All right, so there is a quick look at just a basic sound cue. Now, nothing all that special. Really, this serves as more just an introduction to the interface as anything else. So what I'm going to do now is close this. Now let's create an actually useful sound cue. So back over here in the sound demo package, let's clear out our filter. I'm going to right-click and create a new sound cue, which I'm going to call Spooky Wind Sound Cue. Now, of course, this is blank when it first comes in. So over here inside your content browser, we're going to look for a few specific sound effects. Now, as I'm going through this, if you're following along, feel free to switch things up. If you hear a sound effect that you'd rather use in place of something that I've got, hey, that's awesome. If you want to string your nodes together in a slightly different way for a different effect, that's great too. Just have fun and really get in and play with this, because the sound cue editor can really do some amazing things the more you play with it. So let's start off by picking on a specific sound. I'm going to click on All Assets, and just to keep things simple, we're going to search for only sound wave data. And I want to look for air and wind. And there's a bunch of air wind sound effects. You can double click any of them and sample them. I'm going to pick specifically on air wind 04. With that selected, I will right click and place that into the sound cue editor. If we go ahead and just connect this in, we get... So it's kind of faint, but also kind of creepy. Now, we need this to loop, because right now it only plays once and then it never plays again. So I'm going to right-click, come down to looping, and now we'll connect our air wind into a loop. And hit play. And it may be just a little bit on the faint side. So what I'm going to do is take our volume and kick it up just a little bit. just so that you can hear that a little bit better. Now, let's go ahead and stop that. Now, to make this even spookier, what I'd like is to have a series of other sound effects that can randomly play in the background. Now, I have some sound effects in mind. If you come into your content browser and search for the word murmur, there are a lot of different various murmur sound effects. There's like air murmurs and metal murmurs. And see, to me, that's just really creepy. So let's grab a few of these. I'm going to grab Murmur Squeak, if we scroll way down. I went too far. So Murmur Squeak 01. Let's grab Murmur Metal B05. Murmur Metal B07. I'm not going to sample all of them. We'll listen to them here in just a moment. And then Murmur Metal A03. So with all those selected, let's go back over to the sound cue editor, right-click and place these in. Now, I want to randomly jump between these, but let's play them all back real quick. Here's our squeak. And here's Metal B05. B07. It's like somebody crawling around through ventilation ducts. And then Metal A03. Okay, now what I want to do is randomly choose one of these sound effects to play at any given point. So we're going to create a random, and we'll add 2 more inputs to it by right-clicking. Now let's get all these connected up. All right, now we have are 2 different types of sounds. We have one random sound effect, and we have our air loop, and we need to combine the 2 together. But how are we going to do that? Well, we're going to do that through a mixer. So let me slide these 2 characters back. Now, you just saw me grab 2 and move them. Of course, moving, very much like many of the other visual editors inside of UDK, just requires that you hold down Control and drag around. If you want to make a multiple selection, hold down Control and Alt, and you can drag out a marquee selection box. I'm going to Alt-click on this wire to break it. Let's right-click here and create a mixer. And we'll just wire these 2 sound effects together. Hit play. And we actually have a little bit of a problem in that, 1, our loop cuts off. We're not playing that loop over and over. 2, we only get one of our sound effects, and then that kind of ends the whole thing. Looping generally doesn't like it when you're playing something that doesn't loop along with it. So, in short, what we have to have happen is that our random sound effect has to loop as well. So I'm going to hold down Control and Alt, grab all these nodes and slide them back as well, and let's create another looping node. And if we connect this into its own loop, this means that we're going to select one of these 4 sound effects over and over again. So let's try this out. And we're getting those sounds over and over, which is great. The only problem is, to me, they're coming in with just a little bit too much frequency. So what I'm going to do is put a delay in here. So in between the looping and the random, I'm going to right-click, create a delay, and let's put a random delay. Let's say at any point between 3, not 5, but 3, and 8 seconds, we're going to pick one of these sound effects and play it back. So we just have to wire that in between and give this a try. And just to help you hear it, let me hit stop. Let me come over to my mixer, and I'm going to take the input on 0, which is the topmost input, and I'm going to turn that down to about 0.5. So now the air is actually going to be kind of quiet, and we'll be hearing primarily just the random sound effects that are coming through. So there's one. Could probably actually boost those up a little bit. Oh yeah, that's just freaky. So we've got those looping over and over as well. Now, if we want a little more variety than just our 4 sound effects, we can also modulate those. So I'm going to grab my random and our 4 sound effects and slide those back. And in between the random and the delay, I'm going to right-click and bring in a modulator. We'll connect our random to that and put the modulator into the delay. Now, we'll do a pitch min and a pitch max of, say, 0.5 and... Actually, 0.5 is a little high. Let's go with 0.7 and a pitch max of, 1.3. Now we can also fluctuate the volume a little bit as well. So let's go with 0.8 and 1.2. Now, as we play, it's going to be a little hard to tell because these sound effects are all fairly organic. But what we're doing is each time one of these random sounds is chosen, we're changing its pitch. So that one was really low. We'll listen out for the next one. And there our squeak was toned down just a little bit as well. So it's a way that we can get some extra variety. So with all of this, we've now created a pretty spooky sound cue. So we're done. We can go ahead and close the sound cue editor. Let's go down to our sound demo package, and I'll clear out my filter. And our next step is going to be to save our package. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and end the video. When we come back, we'll take a look at how we can place this sound cue in our level for playback. That'll wrap this video up. Thanks a lot. So we now have a completed sound cue, and now we just need to get it playing back on our level. However, before we do that, I want to talk to you briefly about sound classes. Sound classes are the way in which you define how the engine is going to handle your sound cue. Basically, it's a set of internal rules that control which sounds take priority over other sounds, etc. and so forth. Setting the sound class for your sound cue is very easy. You just need to right-click, and you'll see sound classes currently set to master, and you have several different types of sound class. You have sound effects types. We have music types. If you're actually creating music, you can choose game music, option music, or user music. And then finally you have voice. Now what we're going to do is go under sound effects and choose ambient. Partially because this is an ambient sound, but also this has another important factor as well. This means that our sound cue will later be compatible with ambient zones, which allow us to cause a sound to become muffled as we go from one area to the next. And that's something we're going to take a look at a little bit later. If you do not set a sound cue to the ambient sound class, it will not work with ambient zones. And don't worry, I'll remind you of that when we come back around to it. Now, how do we get this sound to play? Well, one way is we could use Kismet, which I'm not actually going to demonstrate. But earlier on when we set up our sample level, we set up a system by which our trigger could open up our door, and as the door opens, we're playing back sounds. So very, very straightforward. It really only requires that you come up with some sort of event to trigger the sound. It could even be just when the level loads and is playable. And then you just go to right-click, choose New Action, Sound, and grab a Play Sound. You can plug your sound cue right in, and that would work. What we're going to do instead is bring in a sound actor to control playback. It's a positional object we can actually place somewhere in the level. So let's do that. I've got my sound cue selected. Let's close the content browser. I'm going to right-click here on the floor and choose Add Actor. Now you see several different types of sound actor, but only 2 of them will work with sound cues. They are ambient sound and ambient sound movable. Essentially, they're the same. The movable one can be moved. That's really all there is to it. You could attach it to a mover or to a rigid body or anything like that, and you can move that object around. A regular ambient sound does not move by nature. So let's go ahead and just use a regular ambient sound, and we can pick this up out of the floor, and there it is. It's a little icon of a speaker with some like a little sound wave coming out of it, which is so cool. Now, if we switch over to real time here in our viewport, we can start to hear our sound. Now, a quick note. Earlier on, when we were talking about the sound cue editor, I showed you the attenuation node, which allows you to attenuate your sound so that it gets fainter as you move away from it. Let me go ahead and switch that off. It also allows you to spatialize your sound and position it in 3D space. If we had used one of those nodes in the sound cue editor for our sound effect, then we would also see a gigantic sphere of effect that would reach all the way around our level. That sphere of effect controls how your sound fall off looks. Now, we can demonstrate that if we grab any of the sound cues that have some sort of spatialization. In fact, we could probably just create one. Here's our little random number cue. If I right-click and edit this using the sound cue editor, this has attenuation already. So we could just place this the same way we placed the other one. I'm just going to right-click and create a new ambient sound. And check it out. You can see a couple of spheres surrounding this actor. So there's an orange sphere. In fact, just to make things a little bit easier to see, what I'm going to do is pop over to wireframe mode. And then I'm going to move this actor completely away from the level. Now I'm holding down Shift as I move, by the way, so I'm moving the camera along with the object. And what we see are two spheres. Within the inner sphere, that's our radius min, we have full volume. As we pass out of that inner sphere and move toward the surface of the outer sphere, our volume is falling off, and outside this very, very large sphere, we would not be able to hear the sound effect at all. So that's how that works. Now, we don't really need this sound effect in our level. In fact, right now, I don't even think it would affect our level. It's so far away. So we'll just go ahead and delete that. Now, let's fly back over here to our level, and we'll switch back over to lit mode. Okay, so now we've placed this sound in our level. Let's go ahead and give it a quick test by choosing play in level. And we can hear it. And again, because it's not spatialized, and we didn't see any of those radii coming off of the actor, this sound seems to come from everywhere. It'll never get quieter depending on our position. You won't hear it track from speaker left to speaker right. It's just always going to be constant in both speakers or all speakers at the same time. So that is a quick look on how to place a sound cue in your level. Be sure to save your level and save your package, and that will wrap things up for this video. Sound cues are not the only type of asset you can use in your level. You don't have to take every sound effect that you want to use and turn it into a sound cue in order to place it. There is, if we right-click and go to Add Actor, a selection of 3 other actors that we can use. We have the Ambient Sound Simple, Ambient Sound Simple Toggleable, and Ambient Sound Non-Loop. And all 3 of these actors are meant to be used with raw sound wave data. You don't have to worry about creating a sound cue if you don't want to. So let's take a look at dropping an Ambient Sound Simple into our level. We're not going to worry about the toggleable version, though really all that does is it allows you to enable it or disable it. So for instance, you could have a Kismet sequence in which the player throws a switch, and as they do, a sound becomes active. So just one example. Now, what I'm going to do is jump over to the content browser, and let's search for sound wave datas. So let me click on sound wave data, and I'm going to search for engines, and make sure I'm searching through all assets. And I think if I also search for broken, no, it's not. Let me search for broken first. That's what I want. There we go. There's machine broken. I was thinking it was engine, but there's several different really odd engine sounds here. And here's another one. And they kind of oscillate a little bit. So let's take this sound effect here. And let's put that back here on our 2 great big generators that we have. So with this sound selected here inside the content browser, we'll go ahead and close the content browser. I'll right-click here on the floor and choose Add Actor, and we'll just grab an Ambient Sound Simple. And notice that it knows that Machine Broken 13 is going to come along for the ride. Now here's where this differs from the regular ambient sound. Where the ambient sound uses a sound cue, what that means is that all of our control for the sound, how it's going to play back, its volume, its radius, that's all going to be controlled through the sound cue. However, in an Ambient Sound Simple, all of the controls are right here on the actor. So we can press F4. We have Ambient Sound Simple, expand its properties, and we can choose whether or not it's attenuated, spatialized, the distance model, everything that we had inside the sound cue. We can apply a low-pass filter, which can make it sound a little bit muffled. We can modulate the pitch, and we can also add multiple sounds to this. So it's really up to you which one of the 2 you'd like to use. Now, up near the top, we have Ambient Sound, which just has autoplay. If you want this sound to be active as soon as you start the level, make sure that this is on. And what we're going to do is just kind of position this right here along with our generator, kind of out toward the front of it. so the player could kind of walk right up to it. Now, you could put it inside the generator, but that would just make it hard to see. So we'll just leave it out here. And if we go into real time, you can hear this. It kind of sounds like a train. We could put a second copy of it in. And now they both seem to be working. And you can use these to quickly populate your level with sound. It's very easy to do. Just choose the sound effect that you want, and then drop them in and you're good to go. So that is a quick look at adding ambient sound simple actors. Between the two, you really kind of have to make the judgment call. Would you rather have the flexibility of a sound cue, which does allow you to do things like randomly choose between sound clips, which is something that we've made use of, or do you just have a simple sound effect you need to drop in quickly, in which case you can reach for the ambient sound simple. So that will wrap things up for this video. Thanks a lot. All right, at this point, we have a system set up where we have an ambient sound with some wind and some spooky sounds coming from this ambient sound actor. And then here in the back room, we have two ambient sound simples that are creating some nice sound effects for our generators. However, there's a wall dividing the two, and it would be nice if we could set up a system where you couldn't really hear the generators very well while you're out here. But then once you're in here, you can't really hear the wind very well either. Like this room has some soundproofing. Now there's other applications for the example that I'm describing. Let's say you're walking down the street and you can hear the cars and the pedestrians. There's all the standard sounds of a street. But then you want to step into a restaurant. So you step into the restaurant and the doors close behind you and it shuts off the sound of the street, at least for the most part. Maybe you can still hear the occasional horn honk or somebody who shouts real loud. But then really most of what you hear now is the sound of a restaurant. People maybe conversing or the scrape of cutlery on dishes, that sort of thing. Doing this with these radius-based actors can be a little bit difficult. Now, to kind of show you an example of why, let me switch over to a top view. If we wanted to restrict the playback of our generator so that it was really only clearly heard here inside this room, we'd have to be very careful with our radii so that only the edges of the outer radius kind of bled out into the first room, and it would require us to take our ambient sound actors and possibly have a lot of different copies of it just to make sure we filled every nook and cranny. It's kind of tricky. Now, there is an easier way. There's a special type of volume called a reverb volume, which among other things allows you to do reverberation. So if you wanted to do echoes, you could, and there are several different echo settings that you can play with. But more importantly, it allows you to establish ambient zones in your level so that sound effects can be controlled and contained within a specific volume. We could, if we wanted to, completely switch off the sounds of the generators when we leave the back room, and we wouldn't have to touch the radii of these actors at all. It's a very, very cool system. I will give you this one word of warning. As you set up an ambient zone or a reverb volume, every time you change a property, you have to rebuild your geometry because it uses that geometry build as a way to calculate which sound actors are inside the volume and which ones are outside of it. So what I'm going to be doing is just setting this up once, and then we'll pause while I do a full rebuild, and then we'll come back and show it. I'm not going to be doing a lot of setting tweaks back and forth, though it's very easy and fun to play with if you'd like to experiment on your own. So how do you create a reverb volume? Well, you create one the way you create any other volume. First off, we need the red builder brush. So let's come over here. I think I've got it in the side view. And because the last thing I did was create the post-process volume for this back room, it's already exactly the size that it needs to be, which is pretty convenient. So I'm going to slide this up into the level. And just to be picky, I'm going to make sure that this volume is just a little bit offset from the post-process volume for no other reason than it'll make it easier for me to select. So they're just like one little grid space offset from one another. Now, with my red builder brush in position, we're going to right-click and come down to Reverb Volume. Now we can move the red builder brush out of the way at this point. It's gone. And the reverb volume is this great big yellow volume you see here, not to be confused with the great big yellow light mass importance volume. They just happen to have the same coloration. If we hit F4 and take a look at its properties, We have settings and we have ambient zone settings. So if we take a look at the settings, these are basic reverberation settings. Do you want to hear reverb? If so, what kind? And there are several different settings. There's cave, hallway, stone corridor, the kind of stuff that I've been used to seeing like in the effects section of my sound card for a while, but pretty cool to play with. You can also change the volume of your reverberation and the fade time for how quickly it'll fade out. Now, down from here, we have our ambient zone settings. If you check the inside checkbox, you've now established that this volume defines an ambient zone. So until you switch that checkbox, you don't have an ambient zone. Now you have two sets of properties. You have interior properties and exterior properties. Within each, you have volume, time, LPF, and LPF time. Now let's take a quick look at what these do. First off, each one of these two sets of properties you can think of as controlling what's going on the opposite side of the wall. For instance, exterior volume controls how sounds outside the room are going to sound while you're inside the room. Interior volume controls how sounds will sound that are inside the room while you are outside the room. So these properties always control what's taking place on the other side of the wall. And it makes sense, because while you're inside the same volume as your sound, you don't want to affect the sound. You want it to come in at full volume and be there and ready to listen to. So what I'm going to do is take both our interior and exterior volume and pull them way down. We're going to pull them down to, let's say, 0.25. Now, we also have interior and exterior time. This is how long the volume shift will take place. So you don't actually get a pop from high volume to low volume. In this case, by default, it's switching over half a second, which will probably work just fine. But just for the fun of it, let's set these to about 1 second, just to say we changed it. Now we can also apply a low-pass filter. Low-pass filter will tend to make sounds sound muffled. So let's crank this up as well. We're going to take the exterior low-pass filter, and we'll set that to about 0.8, because really that's only going to be affecting the wind sound. So we're not going to affect that too much. But the interior low-pass filter will be affecting how the generators sound while we're outside the generator room. So let's really crank these down. Let's say 0.2. You also have a LPF low-pass filter time as well, so you can control how quickly that low-pass filter changes. So we're going to leave that at 1 second to match our overall volume. So now we've got all these things set up. However, we won't be able to notice a difference until we do a rebuild, because it is at rebuild time that the volume calculates which actors are inside the space of the volume and which actors are without, so that it can apply the appropriate adjustments to volume and low-pass filtering. So what I'm going to do is pause the video. You'll notice just kind of a little bit of a flicker, and when we come back, everything will be rebuilt and we can test this out. Okay, so everything is now rebuilt. Let's go ahead and test out our level. So you can hear the sound, and you can hear those spooky sounds kind of coming through. If you listen, we've now added the sound of those engines kind of coming through the wall. It's really faint, but listen to what happens when we go into the next room. So now they're really loud. It does sound a lot like a train, doesn't it? And you can still make out the ambient sounds coming from the other side of the room. When we leave, though, they get quiet once again. So we've given the illusion that the player's kind of moving through a mostly soundproof room. That is essentially how ambient zones work. Make use of them. They will make your sound setups a lot easier. That's going to wrap things up for this video. Thanks a lot.